All right. We are getting into Exodus. We're into the book or the chapter 14 in Exodus. The children of Israel have left Egypt, and we're going to get into that. That one of those recorded histories of the Bible that almost everybody has heard of, even outside of Christian circles. That where God parts the Red Sea and those children of Israel go through on dry land through that sea, and then the Egyptians, as they come after the Israelites, they try to go through that same path that God had made for the Israelites, and then they wind up getting drowned in the sea, and God destroys those enemies of God, of the Israelites. So that's our chapter 14. I want to, we're going to go over, or I guess I want you to think as we go through this. I want to go through the whole chapter. We'll show a couple maps just so that people kind of get an idea where things are at and where they're traveling and what kind of distance it is and timeline and stuff. And then at the same time, when we're doing that, this going through the sea is likened to baptism. So keep that in mind. It's that whole nation is going through baptism. And really, when you start to look and meditate on what we've been learning in that whole Exodus, the whole leaving from Passover, basically all the way to when the children of Israel enter into the promised land and they go through that second, God parts that other waters, the Jordan River, that place where we wind up in the future seeing Christ and John the Baptist baptizing and Christ baptizing. That this whole recorded history is one giant example of even the individual coming to God through his plan, through baptism, and through his plan of sacrifice. Of course, that starts with what we've already gone over, that Passover, where that Passover lamb is sacrificed. God makes the um, substitutes, and looking to the future, God substituting himself as Christ for, taking our punishment, that for whatever sin we may have committed in the past or future, that he would take that punishment and sin from us and take it on himself on that cross. And the next big step we have, once you get to God providing that way, that path, that sacrifice for sin, the next thing is that understanding that you get into that baptism. And baptism, going through the water, is it's an example of the womb and somebody being born from the water. When you're in the womb, you're in this sack of water, and then as you're born, you come out of that water and you're into this new world. And the baptism is symbolic of that. We're going to see it's symbolic of the old man or woman that is sinful, dying, and a new creation, a new man, woman born, mingled with the Spirit of God out of that. And so here we see the whole nation taking that on, going through the water, and that's symbolic of that death and dying with Christ on the cross of that old nation, that old man and woman of sin, and then that resurrection. So keep that in mind as we go through. And as we go through this whole book of Exodus, again, that it really lays out what's going on in the wilderness is the refinement of that whole nation to putting the laws of God in their hearts and in their minds, and burning off, taking off the chaff, the people that go against God's word throughout the wilderness, etc., until they're ready to go into that promised land. So, that all being said, I'm going to pull up, do a little share here so that we have a little map of what's going on. I'm going to start with this. This is what the common travels of the Exodus people will say. I don't agree with it. There's a couple different paths that um, different people over different times and different groups believe have been. This is probably the most commonly believed, that they're coming from Ramses going to Sukkot. Again, this is a nation of a couple million people on foot with their animals, livestock, everything else. And they go through here. This is, again, not what I believe the path is, but I want to show it just because it's the most common. And then crossing the Red Sea here, and then Mount Sinai and all the things that happen as we go through, and the rest of the book of Exodus happening over here. However, the problem with that is that Midian is over here, and it says that the Sinai is where Moses went to with his father-in-law, right? He was doing uh, watching the flock of his father-in-law Jethro in Midian. And so Midian's always historically here. I haven't found anywhere where it says it's over here. This area was very much, from what I can tell, there was no nations that ever lived in this area as a whole. This is much desert, must have been much desert as it is today. It's very uninhabitable. You'll see some cities today on the coasts down here and over there, and that's probably the same thing that was there, even at a lesser degree, of course, back in that day. But all this stuff, all this is really desert. Not only that, this was all considered Egypt at that time. So when we're talking about the children of Israel leaving Egypt, they didn't go very far, and they didn't leave Egypt if this is where they wound up, because again, they they left Egypt. Okay. um, so anyway, that being said, everybody's got to make their own opinions, do their own research from Bible and from research archaeologically and things like that. I don't attest to that path. This is this is the other kind of paths that are suggested. There's about four of them. We know they didn't go this way, because this way would be a normal, very normal route. This would have been a huge trade route going right to Palestine in that area. It says specifically that God didn't take them that way because he was worried about them freaking out, because they would see war right away, and so he didn't take them this way. Um, I believe pretty much there, you can't see it, but there's this red line here that's underneath some of these, and I'll get to one that just shows that in a minute. That they went this way, and the crossing of the Red Sea, and this way, and this way, and the crossing of the Red Sea is actually this part of the Red Sea. This is part of the Red Sea here. This is what goes up to Egypt. This is part of the Red Sea that goes up to modern day Israel, Elat, and Aqaba is modern day. Okay. Um, Others will say that they took this route here and then crossed the Red Sea here and then went down, down all the way over, no, down this way and then back and then into the promised land this way. Again, that means that they're saying Sinai and all that's over here. There's another group of people that believe they went this way, crossed what is really a lake here, not the sea itself, but there's a large lake here, and they crossed that lake instead of the sea, and then they came down, and then they came down, and Sinai was in here too, and then you've got this yellow line where some people say they went all the way down to the end of the peninsula, and then they crossed the Red Sea at this point where um, again, I don't know 100% which one is accurate, but in my feeling, they went. This was a trade route that went from basically from Egypt to here. There was major cities, or on the coast here, and so there was a major trade route all through this time, and even to this day still, that went this way. And they had a bunch of cattle. They needed water. They needed places. This would have had places to stop all along the way to, take care of animals and all that kind of stuff. Down here, it would have been much less traveled. There wasn't a lot of travel going down this way at that time. Um, so, and also there's a lot of archaeological evidence for Mount Sinai and some of the other things that have been found even recently of that indicate that children of Israel were here and Mount Sinai is here and etc. The rock that flowed water is here. And again, this is the land of Midian. This is where Jethro would have been. I can't imagine Moses went from where Jethro is and fed his flock all the way over here. That's like 100, 100 plus miles. It doesn't add up very easily, biblically or again, archaeologically. Um, so I'm going to just pull up the, let me find the path so this is that trade route that I was talking about. Again, this is showing the traditional route that people think the Exodus took, going over this little lake instead of they like to dumb down God's word and make it, say, well, they couldn't have really crossed the sea, but they could have crossed a lake maybe, right? Um, so this is the basic path that I think that they actually took. Um, Goshen would have been, in this area here, saying right there, whether or not that's completely accurate or not, I don't know for sure. But as of the end of chapter 13, they had gone from Goshen to Sukkot. Okay. And then I believe they took this again, which would have been a well traveled place. We know the children of Israel start complaining about water after they get over the sea, but they don't complain about it before. So they had to take some kind of way that was well watered and they can continue to have their flocks and themselves fed. Um, from a mileage standpoint, it's about 150 miles from Goshen to this area. So, and I couldn't figure out exactly. I don't think it tells you exactly how many days it took them to get to here, which is going to be the crossing of the Red Sea that we read about tonight. But the next date that we get that I could find, there might be, if somebody can tell me there's another one, that'd be great. That tells us exactly when they were here, that'd be great. But um, once they get across the sea, they go to 3 days wilderness to a certain area. They don't think I have it on here right now. And then the next date we get is 30 days, somewhere over their 30 days, exactly a month from when they left. They're already over the sea. So the way I figure it is probably 15 to 20 days is how long it took when the crossing of the Red Sea from when the firstborn were killed in Egypt and they started their trek. I'm saying about 15 to 20 days is my guess. Of course, that's traveling a lot of people, but they knew they were going and they were ready to go. And, you didn't have these people worked physically all their lives. You didn't have a lot of people that would be hard to travel. Traveling, that would make it, if it was 15 days, that would make it 10 miles a day approximately. And you're also got God with you, and you're also running from, potential army. Um, I don't think that that's unreasonable. And if it was 20 days, then you're even down to like whatever, maybe 8 miles a day or so. And for people that would have been in the shape that they were in, that that's and exactly in the circumstances they were, I don't think that would have been a very difficult thing to accomplish. And the other reason I think that they went this way, if they went down this way, where were they going? They're going to the promised land. That was the idea, right? Why would they go down this way? It doesn't make any sense. Now, it's possible. It's not impossible. And why would they go down this way as well? They're going to the promised land. They don't want to go this way because there's too many people that they're going to have to fight and get in a war with. But no doubt this is the way that Moses would have taken to get there, because this would be the normal spot if you don't have God parting the sea to go to to get there. So most likely they would have taken the route that would have been obviously well traveled, easy for them to walk on, water available, etc. So that is my little take on it. I'll give you a couple of little of the archaeological things that you find. Um, so if they took, let me see here. Sorry, I'm just gonna. So if they took the route that I think they took, this is where they would have wound up at before the crossing. There's a very large area. They would have came through this area, and they would have wound up here. And then Pharaoh would have been chasing them this way. Um, that's the only way. That's the only way in here, really, at that time. So a big, large place, and it just so happens archaeologically at that sea, at that spot, which let me go back to. This would be again. That would be that spot that I was showing you there, and at that, this sea is very deep. It's about 5,000 feet deep here, and it's about 5,000 feet deep here. However, this right where that place is, this exists. Yeah, and it's about 900 foot total dip and up. So, and it's about 10 miles. So a 900 foot slow slow row for 10 miles is not, not is completely doable. And if you were going to part the sea and have some people walk across, seems like a pretty good spot. And obviously God knew that spot was there. And when you get over that spot, um, there's some so besides that geological thing that's there, and I'm assuming if there was one in this area that somebody would have showed you that too. Again, this stuff is probably fairly deep. We This is the Suez. This is what goes to the current day Suez Canal. So obviously it's deep all the way going through here. And if there was something like that in that area, I would imagine somebody would have pointed that out as well by now. And when the people went diving in that area and they find things that look like chariot wheels that turned into, of course, coral now. They look like this. See the axle and a wheel and a wheel. They found human bones. They found horse bones or coral that formed around those things, the bones, and that's not there anymore. But again, the area that they wound up in, again, just to just to show it again, would have been over on the other side here. Um, and again, like this is called the Sinai Peninsula, of course, because that's where the traditional place that people say Moses would have wound up. Again, it's technically would have been Egypt at that time. It wouldn't have been very far from Egypt. There's not a lot of people to keep you from having problems with Egypt. um, and when you get over there, we'll learn as we go through the record of Exodus, we hear of the splitting of the rock of Moses, and this is sitting in that area, this rock. And there's clear, what do you call it, erosion patterns as if water was flowing out of this rock. So there's a record history that we're going to read about where Moses comes down and the children are complaining about not having water, and then God says, go speak to the rock, and Moses winds up smacking it instead of speaking to it, and then it breaks in two and water flows out of it. Yeah, that's the thing too. it's in Saudi Arabia, and they don't like people going to this area either, which makes me even think more of it. I mean, if you had that area, um, wouldn't you want to boast it? But if somebody started digging around and doing DNA tests over there of Barry's body, they're Barry's body, yeah, something like that. Buried bodies. So there's another picture of that rock. I mean, it's pretty prominent, pretty, and then there's mountains in the background, and then there's a lot of plain, large area for enough for a couple million people to sit in tent. And then they find graves of a large amount of graves off about 3 miles from this area too. Um, let's see here. Here's another one of just the idea of that coral. And there is a number of good YouTube uh, documentaries from good archaeologists and that worked on this that you can find on YouTube. They're well to watch and look at. And then they have this giant mountain there, which eh, is stained black all throughout a large portion of it. And we have that, why is it stained? Why is it charred? So we're going to find out that God was up there with the and in a fire. So there's that area again. There is the area again that the children of Israel would have left from over that plateau in the ocean. Um, so I think that's good enough to now we'll walk through it. I'll leave up where I think I'll just leave that map up because we're going to be basically following that. So we'll go back to the end of chapter 13 quick just to get us caught up. Um, just to verse 17 here. It says, and it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. Okay, so that's up again. That would have been a very common trade route, would have been the easiest way to get to where they were going, right there. He said, I'm not going to send you that way because of the problem of war. And that's also the same reason why I think they dipped down this way. Besides, God wanted to part the sea and had to get them over that place that was ideal for it. But the children of Israel, if they go here, this is all inhabited with. This would have been war too. This was all inhabited with Amalekites and Canaanites and Edom and all sorts of people. And so coming out where there would have been less population and not an immediate threat, even friendly people, because Moses' father-in-law was in this area, and he was a priest in the area, so he had a high spot. So it brought him into a place where they could spend their time and get those 10 commandments, and God could start to refine them and baptize them. Okay, so for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. So this would be that path that's on the wilderness going to the Red Sea that is so famous. Okay. And the children the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And we'll skip down here to verse 20. And they took that journey from Succoth and encamped at Etham in the edge of the wilderness. So Etham is down in this area. Again, this is on the edge of the wilderness. This is all this wilderness that they're talking about. And then again, at this border is all the, lots of inhabitants, lots of the offspring of the fallen angels, lots of different peoples, Amalekites, Edomites, Moabites, Canaanites, etc. And God said, "Well, I don't want them to. If they went this way, they would have the same problem as if they went that way." um, all right. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. And he took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Okay, so they're traveling some 15, 20 days here. God is over them, protecting them from the sun in the daytime with the cloud, and then bringing forth fire at night for light for them. So it'd be some sight for the Egyptians that just got rocked by God, and then all the people hearing the things that have happened, and starting to hear that these guys are on the move towards us. Okay, so then into verse or chapter 14, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. So Pihahiroth also means basically the exit of. Let me just check my notes here quick. The mouth of the gorges. So all these mountains, of course, you'd get the rain in these mountains, and it carves out places where that water goes to, and you've got the place of the gorges where all those gorges meet. Basically, it's plural of gorges. So where all these gorges meet, again, would be this is where they all a lot of them from this whole side of the mountains they come out this way. They all carved out this area over time. All right. And Migdal just means watchtower. So they're again, this was Egyptian owned. This was Egyptian land. Did they maybe had a fort in that area? Maybe had a watchtower, or maybe it's just the name of another mountain or a high place in that area potentially. Um, it's not known, but it means tower. Okay, and the sea over against them, and Baal Zephon, because it shall before it shall ye encamp by um sorry, by the sea. My eyes keep going back and forth from this and that. It's messing my eyes up. Sorry. Um and Baal Zephon could be in the mountain of winter. So you're looking at some mountains that were high enough potentially to have snow on them, etc. Could be in the Sinai Peninsula, or could be looking over to the mountain of mountain range in Midian where they were heading. It could be either one of those that it was describing. It says, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in. Again, you know, if you're going to have scouts here, this is all Egyptian land. You're going to have people and scouts going back to Pharaoh and telling them what's going on, etc. They're all burying their firstborn in this 15, 20-day period. um, and again, the thought would be, of course, well, they went this way. They can't keep, Pharaoh's going to say, hey, they can't keep going because there's people that aren't going to let them go once they get to this spot. So he knows that they're going down into this wilderness. He knows that basically they're trapped in the valley here, traveling through a valley that's thin and a good place to go and pursue after them and then overtake them. And he knows that he's going to know the lay of that land and know that there's no way out. They're going to be stuck between mountains and sea. Okay. And of course, this is all God's plan to, again, hardens Pharaoh's heart and do his last great wonder, which is going to be drown these guys, part that sea, and then drown these guys, the enemies, for once and for all here. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, on all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So God hardened their heart. And we just read through that whole first chapters. We know what happened to them. And these guys are now going to think, that they could come and go get the children of Israel after everything that's been done. Again, it can only be supernatural blindness to a people to come after them after what everything that God had already done unto them. And so it is. And it was told the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. I would also have you think and meditate on that first earth age. God flooded that whole earth at that time, more than Noah's flood. It was a flood that covered the entire world. I remember God in Exodus the earth became void and without form, and then he has to separate the waters and put up some of the waters in the atmosphere, and some of the waters turn into the seas because that whole earth had been destroyed. No doubt this is an example of what happened there. No doubt God um, used that same baptism symbology, that same destruction of the enemy at that time, Satan and those that were following him in that giant flood when he crushed the earth with that. So you have another example, of course, of the same idea: baptism by water, rebirth in the flood of Noah as well. God used that to destroy the offspring of the fallen angels and Satan. So we see these things always. People say history repeats itself, but we go back all the way, and it's been happening even in that first earth age, and no doubt in my mind that this was a similar thing that was going on there. We had Satan and his followers trying to overcome God and those followers of God, and that was the end result, was the destruction of the earth in a flood. 7, and he took 600 chosen chariots. And he made ready his chariots and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and the captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and the horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea besides Pihahiroth before Baal Zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. No doubt God, the Egyptians would have had scouts in those mountains and watching for any enemies or Pharaoh's army, and they saw him, and they saw him coming, and the people started to freak out. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And so, not just the heart of the Egyptians are getting hardened here, the heart of the Israelites are blind to what God's done for them to get them out of Egypt, and for them not to, have the be convinced that God's going to take care of them, even when they're looking at a sea and a mountains on their sides and an army coming at them. The Israelites should have known better at that time that God would take care of them. So there's that too. So you got the Egyptians blinded, but you got these Israelites starting to complain, which we'll see as a theme, which again is quite unbelievable, but it's lesson for all of us. And we also look forward even to the end time when Satan and his angels are here, because God likens that and says that we will be in the wilderness at that time, and that's what it's going to be like. So it's going to be like the children of Israel in the wilderness at that end time for us. And we just want to make sure that we're not murmurers and complainers, but we stick to that word of God and that instruction of God and that guidance from God, and not be overwhelmed by maybe what we see with our eyes. 13. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Now, at the same time, if the Israelites were doubting, it'd be pretty hard to imagine that, what is going to happen. We were stuck in the sea. We don't have boats. We got no other way out. And the army of the Egyptians would have been probably the top military at the time. They weren't, we're not talking about a few warriors chasing these guys. We're talking about a well-trained army that had essentially Egypt had conquered and they were conquered a lot of the Canaanite lands in different times and places, and all the way down into many parts of Africa as well. And I, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them, and I will get me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon all his host, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of the Lord, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And that pillar of the cloud went from before their face, and then it stood behind them. So God moves that cloud that was protecting them to be in between the Egyptians' army and the Israelites at this point. So as God's going to get prepared to part the sea, which he does over the night, he's got himself as the angel of the Lord, as in that cloud, protecting the children of Israel from that army and host of the Egyptians. And it came and it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all night. So God divided them, and I'm sure it was quite a sight and quite a darkness that these Egyptians were at, and they still wait in the morning for the cloud to be raised, and they run into the sea. So 21, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. So he brings forth the wind. This is how he does it. Tells us how he did it. He brought forth it must have been quite the wind. um, that it would part, like 900 feet of 10 miles of ocean and divide it into two there. And the children of Israel went into the midst of that sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Again, quite the miraculous sign here for these Israelites as they're going into that wilderness uh, to be refined by God. And again, we see this is talked about by Christ. This is talked about by almost all the disciples in different places. They didn't talk about it because it was a fairy tale. Okay, and the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of the fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians. And so God, again, God is hanging out with these guys almost throughout this entire Exodus. And if you look at Ezekiel chapter 1 and 10, and then Isaiah, I can't remember what chapter it is, maybe 13, you see a description of God. And when he comes to Ezekiel and he's in his ship, his chariot, his flying chariots, and there's good descriptions there, and no doubt God was there with his chariot and probably many others with him at that time. So that's what this pillar was. That's what was going on here. If you want details of that, go those places, and you might get a little idea of what it might have looked like here. And a lot of times, he's probably hidden in a cloud. Even when Christ is transfigured, it says that great cloud comes upon them, and a great sight as well. So God's looking out of that cloud, and he took off their chariot wheels that they drave them heavy, so that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians." So here they are. They got that God in between them and the Israelites all night long. And the sea, they're looking at, 900-foot walls of sea on either side of this crowd of 1 million people walking that just walked through the sea, and they're on the other side. Now the Egyptians run in, and it takes them to this point where God starts pulling the wheels off of their chariots, and they start dragging in the dirt to finally realize that God's fighting for them. And I can't imagine once they got to that point what kind of fear must have fell upon them, and trying to make a run for it the opposite direction with the wall of the sea around you on both sides. Um, would have made for an amazing spectacle for those Israelites. And it makes it hard to understand their behavior and their turning from God almost instantly in the wilderness, but so it is. 26, and the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth their hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength. And when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of that sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So we have that, again, that great last sign here that God does to the Egyptians. Um, this is, of course, this is good, doing a lot of things. Again, Egypt had a great deal of influence and power over the Canaan and over the land of the Canaanites. There's when the children of Israel 40 years later do come into the land of promise and they start to war against the people that are inhabitants of that land, there's recorded tablets of people from these cities, kings and queens, or kings and people from elders from these cities, asking Egypt to come and help them when the children of Israel come in this land. So they had great influence over it. So God is obviously doing the first thing is overcome the army that the children of Israel would never been able to go in there and defeat these guys if the army of Egypt was going to help them, because Egypt would have came and they wouldn't have been able to overcome all that army plus the help of the Egyptians. Would have been really tough. So God gets rid of, it'd be like getting rid of the getting rid of the head honcho of the day before you went in to get the rest of that land. So God's destroying them. He's also putting the fear of God throughout the land of where they're heading, of course. And he's also doing what he said, that his name would be great, and that we're sitting here repeating that history today. So I thought we'd have a little bit more time. We're almost out of time. I'll just we'll go to First Corinthians, just to give that. I started with giving you that idea to understand this and look at this also as the baptism of that whole nation. And in First Corinthians, we have that confirmation of that, not just something that I made up. So First Corinthians chapter 10, page 1711, it looks like. All right. Starting with verse 1 here. This is God speaking through Paul. It says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all of our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea." This is a letter to the Corinthians. Corinth would have been on the basically part of modern day Greece. One of the largest cities of Rome, the Roman Empire at that time. And who's he speaking to? He's speaking to his brethren. They were all over there. Okay. The Israelites had been scattered a long time before into those areas. Remember that. But the fathers were under that cloud. We're talking about that cloud that we're speaking about that gave them protection from the heat by the day and gave them a light at night. And they all passed through the sea. And they were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Okay, so there's your start of that idea of baptism here. That symbolic. Again, looking forward to the baptism that John would do for those before Christ and preparing them to be prepared for Christ here. And did all eat that same spiritual meat? So we're going to get to that in our history as we go on here in Exodus. That manna that came from heaven. And they all drank the same spiritual drink, that water that came out of that rock that we saw today. But we're speaking, of course, we're not just speaking. God did those physical miracles for the Israelites. But what really was important, of course, was the word of God that came down and fed them in truth and gave them that spirit of God and truth, that water of life and truth. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So who was that angel in the cloud? Again, right? It was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. And neither be ye idolaters, as was some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. That happens when when Moses goes up into the mountain to get the commandments, and then he comes down, and they thought he was 40 days and 40 nights. They thought Moses was gone. They didn't know what happened to him, so they decided to start their own religion and made some golden calves and said, "This is this is the God that came and saved you out of Egypt." And they had a big festival. 8, neither let us commit fornication as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. That's when they started to mix in with the Midianites and others of the land. And neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. So that's looking forward to where God has Moses put the serpent or that Nakash, that shining one, on the pole when the children are plagued by God because, again, they murmured and rebelled against him in that wilderness. After all these things that we've read about here. God said it's an example for all of us. I'm glad we have the example, because sure know that it takes me a lot of understanding, and we still stumble a lot here in the flesh. 10, neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened unto them for in samples or examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And so, Paul, once Christ comes, he starts talking about it as the end. You'll hear him talk about it as it's the end of the world. So that next step, that salvation had come, and we're in that last step in the world, even in Paul's time. But they were examples, and they're for our admonition, for us to understand, study, learn. We've seen God talk about the Israelites, commanding them to commemorate that Passover, commemorate other things that will go on as we go through Exodus. They're going to commemorate the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. That's what Pentecost is and becomes, etc. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. So he's saying, let's take that example. They had all these amazing miracles that God had done for them, and carried them, uh, coddled them through the wilderness, as we're going to see, and fed them from heaven, gave them water out of the rock, took care of every bit of their needs, giving them the instruction of God with his own mouth from heaven, etc. And these guys fell. A lot of them fell. Even to the fact that God said, "Well, I'm not even going to bring your generation into the promised land," because he was so upset with them that he waits till the generation that was came out of Egypt was pretty much died off by the time God brings them into that promised land. That's how upset he was with them falling. But Paul is saying, let's not do that. We don't have to do it, because we have that new way. We have that Holy Spirit that God gives us to mingle with our spirit. So, but let us pay attention and heed to that, because if we don't, and we don't understand that correctly, we will wind up the same way that a lot of those people in the wilderness of Israel fell. Oh, And we'll end it here on 13 here. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. So, um, everything that we go through, there's probably somebody else and other and many others that have gone through very similar things. Hard to hard to hard to compete with what these people had seen in Egypt and in the wilderness, etc. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with that temptation always make a way to escape that ye may be able to bear it. So God has given us a nice promise there that as He gave the children of Israel many, many, many chances in that wilderness, He also, when we have trouble, we have temptation, we have problems, especially like I said, that God likens that end time to the children of Israel being in the wilderness. So we're going to have that. We're going to have that same kind of difficulties that they had in the wilderness. So we'll leave it there.